In my restless YouTube dreams, I subscribed to that channel, Internet Gaming. You promised you'd upload another video someday, but you never did. Well, I'm logged on there now, hitting F5 on the same page, waiting for you. Hey guys, you're logged on to the Internet, and if you're wondering why I'm in a different filming location than usual, it's because suddenly I find that all the locks in my house are broken and I can't open them, and I'm not willing to put any effort or use any implement in my inventory to make that happen. So while I'm stuck here, I thought we would talk about one of the best classic survival horror games ever, Silent Hill 2, and I'll give you my takes on it. Well, that doesn't sound good. Growing up, we were a Nintendo household, so all that good classic horror missed me for quite a while. It's a bit hazy as to which happened first, but Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 2 were two of the first survival horror games I played just because they were on Nintendo consoles. I want to say that I got a hold of Remake and liked it so much I went back to play 2 on the N64, but that's a bit hazy. I do know that as soon as Resident Evil 0 was announced, it went on my Christmas wish list. Years later, after playing through FF10 on a friend's PS2 and hearing Final Fantasy X-2 was happening, I saved up the cash and bought my own PS2. Buying a PS2 was a bit of a gaming renaissance for me. I suddenly had access to a huge catalog of great games that I missed out on as they came out. This PS2 is full of great games.
How can you sit there and eat pizza?
I'd always read strategy guides and GamePro for games like the original Resident Evil and Silent Hill 1, but they were always just these games I read about and had actual very little working knowledge of. So around 2006 or so, as I was browsing my local rental store, I spotted a copy of Silent Hill 2 and decided to give it a shot. I thought maybe it'd be just like Remake, and in some ways it was, but it was different in all the right ways too. You guys have played Resident Evil Remake, right? Wait, no, stop, go back. The gameplay is similar, but it's different enough. We still have to talk about it. It would be a lie if I said this game was not similar to classic Resident Evil, but A Quiet Place 2 still has its own flair. If you think about it, Resident Evil and Silent Hill boils down to three-ish gameplay styles. Solving puzzles, collecting keys, exploring new areas, backtracking to places you've already been, and combat, running away from enemies and shooting them before they get close again. You see, Resident Evil is primarily science fiction. The majority of the horror is derived from being in an outlandish situation with few resources and limited movement options. Silent Hill allows unlimited use of actually useful melee items, and lets you stockpile ammo and healing items too, but it still manages to be scary thanks to the game's supernatural atmosphere. Whereas RE uses your situation to scare you, Silent Hill primarily relies on the fear of the unknown. Most of Silent Hill's environments are pitch black, and your character has to use a flashlight to cut a tiny little path forward. Enemies will respawn from time to time, things in rooms will be different from time to time, and the enemies are grotesque monstrosities. Resident Evil's enemies can be ugly too, but Silent Hill is on a whole nother level with enemy design because they don't have to be mutated from something else, they're all psychologically created. Everyone has seen a zombie, they know what they do, they understand their MO. They're scary because you're not equipped to deal with them. But this? Who knows what this is? What does it want? How did it get here? Sadly, despite this new take on survival horror, enemies defeating them is the same as it was in Resident Evil. Run away, turn back, fire, repeat. If you're a resource stockpiler like myself, you'll find yourself meleeing all the enemies you can to safely melee, and then you'll have more than enough ammo for your most powerful guns to waste bosses without too much effort. The developers of the game were big fans of the M1 Abrams, so the controls in the game are also tank controls, but they give you a few graces to help. If you hold the shoulder buttons while you walk, you can move from side to side to better maneuver around enemies, and the game also lets you move while you have a weapon drawn, unlike Resident Evil. Sam the Sham wrote a song called Wooly Bully, and much like Wooly Bully, you need to watch me because I'll get you. I'll spoil this game. If you missed the original Silent Hill 2 and you're waiting to play the remake for the first time through, you might want to skedaddle past this part or at least tread very lightly. But seriously, I'll get you. You gotta watch me now. But seriously, Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001. What have you been waiting for all this time? Nintendo to make one? Silent Hill 2 pulls a Tobey Maguire on us by making the second entry largely unrelated to the series as a whole. Silent Hill 1 on PlayStation was about a guy searching for his daughter in Silent Hill amidst the backdrop of an evil cult and their activities. Some of that is referenced in Silent Hill 2, but for the most part, Silent Hill 2 is about an unrelated set of characters who are in the town for their own reasons. Silent Hill 3 would eventually return to the cult storyline and the characters from the first game, but Silent Hill 2 is widely regarded as the best of the series, so ask yourself, who is the true victor in this fight? Anyway, Silent Hill 2 focuses on James Sunderland and the cast of characters he encounters in the evil town.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway?
Silent Hill 2's intro is iconic, and I must admit it's one of my favorite hooks for a gaming plot ever. I got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. It's iconic. Ask anyone who's played this game, and they'll remember the intro. It manages to ask 1,000 questions that you want the answer to.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself. A dead person can't write a letter. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. So then, why am I looking for her? Our special place. What could she mean? This whole town was our special place. Does she mean the park on the lake? We spent the whole day there. Just the two of us, staring at the water. Could Mary really be there?
Who sent this letter? Is his wife still alive? How did his wife die? Why is he still set to go in town if it's abandoned? How did a town they vacationed in just a few years back already completely die out? Given the age of this game and the age of the people who played it back when it came out, I'd venture to guess most of you have experienced a loss of some kind in your life. Imagine if you got a letter from that person and they said they were waiting for you. Like James says,
It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true.
But you'd be intrigued, probably a bit angry and incredulous, but if you were desperate or in a bad enough place of mind, you might actually check it out, or at least I think that's something someone in a bad headspace would be willing to do to find a recently lost loved one. So to recap, James gets a letter from his wife who died 3 years ago. She says she's waiting for him in Silent Hill, so he goes to find her. The town is full of monsters, yada yada. He goes from place to place, trying to find her, and the game goes along as he uncovers the terrible truth. Breakdowns, character analyses, and recaps are an absolute dime a dozen for Silent Hill 2 on YouTube, so I'm not going to make this video an hour long by breaking these things down, but I will give you a basic overview of the story and my thoughts and personal opinions on it. James comes to town to find Mary, and along the way he meets 4 other characters: the childish but dark Eddie, the scattered Angela Orozco, and Laura, a bratty but ultimately innocent child. The 4th character is the most mysterious, a woman named Maria who looks just like James' late wife, but different in dress and demeanor.
You don't sound very happy to see me.
Angela is the first one encountered, and despite her awkward countenance, she manages to tell you that the town is dangerous, and she's also there looking for her mother. James continues on, following a series of vague hints, until he ends up in an apartment building filled with monsters that all seem to have something to do with his past trauma, whether he realizes it or not. It's here he sees Laura for the first time, as well as meets Eddie, who's throwing up in a toilet that was already ruined before Eddie got to it. Eddie mentions he's not even from this town, and is strangely insistent that he didn't do anything, despite the fact that James never accuses him of anything. He also stereotypes plumbers. You see, Silent Hill follows the Resident Evil and Castlevania DS format for progressing the story. You'll generally encounter each character a time or two in every major area, just like how in Resident Evil you'll find Barry once or so in the mansion, later in the residence, once in the caves, etc., etc. Each area, in addition to puzzles and enemies, throws in cutscenes with the other characters that move their story arcs along. Not every character is in every area, but for the most part, expect to find each character and talk to them 1 or 2 times per level, for lack of a better word. Another interesting thing about Silent Hill is that the game implies that it changes itself to fit the person who's there. As you meet these characters more and more, eventually you'll be able to step into the evil otherworld Silent Hill as they experience it, not the way James sees it. Each encounter with them drip feeds you a little bit more information. Angela, for example, becomes much more depressed throughout the game, Eddie seems to be more and more out of touch with his situation before snapping, and Maria keeps you guessing. You never know what she'll do next. This is the beauty of Silent Hill 2. The gameplay is good old survival horror, but the story and the symbolism and dark emotion it puts on display is much harder hitting than anything the cheesy Resident Evil storylines or the somewhat hammy cult storylines of Silent Hill 1 and 3 could do. Each of the 3 main characters, James, Angela, and Eddie, are in Silent Hill due to trauma in their past. Laura and Maria are main characters too, but thematically James, Angela, and Eddie are special. As you go through the game, you realize that Angela suffered horrific abuse at the hands of her father and brother, and that she killed them and was called by Silent Hill. She thinks she's there to look for her mother, who's certainly not actually there. Eddie shot and killed the dog of a football player who was bullying him, and when the football player expectedly snapped back, Eddie shot him in the leg, so Silent Hill called to him as well. It's almost like all the people that are called are murderers. Let's talk about Maria. After finishing the apartment complex section, you'll encounter a more promiscuous version of James' wife, calling herself Maria. James is taken aback by the resemblance, and Maria seems to enjoy messing with him. She goes from being a bit forward to totally bizarre in behavior throughout the game. At times, she even acts like she's straight up Mary rather than just Maria. Maria will follow you at certain points and have to be protected from monsters during certain sections. For most of the time, it's because she wants to find Laura, who she says should be in danger due to the town's monsters, even though Laura doesn't seem to see any monsters in the town. Clever players will realize that something is off with Maria way before the game makes it obvious. For starters, she refuses to go to any location with another human. Angela, Eddie, or even Laura will never see her, only James. She's also murdered at several points in the story, only to return seemingly unharmed just to be murdered again. Exactly what Maria is something left up to interpretation. It's accepted by most fans that she's something cooked up by the town from James' imagination, but whether she's a demon, a creation of his psyche totally, or something else is never clarified by the game. Maria did get her own scenario in the Xbox and PC version of the game, and she is intelligent unlike the other monsters and seems to have a free will of her own. Although you could make a point that as the game main story wears on, she becomes more and more just about carrying out her job as punishment for James rather than someone with free will. She also seems to have some of Mary's memories, and she knows who Laura is despite the fact that James seemingly never met Laura until he came to Silent Hill, so therefore how could she be fully of James's imagination? And why would Maria need to punish James, you ask? In case you haven't figured out, Mary didn't die 3 years ago. She died a few hours ago. When Mary came home from the hospital for a bit, James couldn't take it anymore and smothered her with a pillow before driving to Silent Hill and falling under the delusion that she sent him a letter to come there. Each of the 3 main characters are all murderers for different reasons. Eddie killed a dog and shot a guy in the leg because he couldn't take the bullying he endured any longer. Angela killed her father and brother due to the horrific abuse they heaped on her. You find out about Angela and Eddie's murders and backstories well before you learn the truth about James, but it's always there if you're paying close enough attention. Even Eddie and Angela will make comments throughout the game that implies this, and the game's puzzles will hint at it too. James only discovers the truth for himself at the very end of the game, and he realizes the purpose of Maria and the Pyramid Heads. They were created from his mind by the town to punish him for what he did and make him remember it. Once James accepts this, the 2 pyramid enemies kill themselves and James moves on to the final confrontation. The final boss changes slightly depending on which ending track you're on, but for most of them you will encounter Maria on the hotel roof, who transforms into a boss saying that James deserves to die for what he did. James puts down this Maria apparition and one of several endings plays. James gets a moment to reconcile with Mary in what is either a dream or the magic of Silent Hill. He truly loved her, but couldn't bear seeing her suffer anymore, while at the same time selfishly wanting his life back. After we get this, we get to see the full text of the actual letter from Mary, not the fake one he dreamed up. And then the ending splits depending on your actions throughout the game. In the Leave ending, James takes Laura and leaves Silent Hill, having come to terms with what he did and having resolved to move past the grief. In the In Water ending, he decides he can't live without Mary and decides the reason he actually came to Silent Hill was to kill himself. So he drives his car with Mary's body in it into the lake and drowns. The Rebirth ending, only available on New Game Plus, sees James trying to use the evil power of Silent Hill to resurrect Mary from the dead. And there's also 2 joke endings where UFOs and dogs are behind everything, but obviously these are made as a joke. Most of the game's staff members in the official novel say that the In Water ending is their preferred choice because they're edgelords or something, but honestly I prefer the Leave ending. And yes, I'm a sucker for a good ending, but so what? I think leaving makes sense thematically. You see, Eddie, James, and Angela represent 3 choices in my mind. All 3 characters have been through horrible grief and trauma. Eddie has to be put down by James in a boss fight because he loses his mind and decides to give in to his hatred and grief and become a monster, willing to kill anyone who looks at him wrong. Angela takes a different route and decides she can't face the trauma of what's been done to her and decides to vanish into a burning hallway likely to her death. Suicide is a major theme of the character, and she even asked James for her knife back before disappearing. I suppose it's possible Angela did survive, but more than likely she resigned herself to death in Silent Hill. Narratively, this frames James as someone who overcomes. Kind of like how in Shin Megami Tensei, the protagonist is the natural fit to go neutral because the Law and Chaos heroes are destined to play their roles. If the protagonist goes Law or Chaos, the narrative balance is knocked askew. That doesn't mean it's not interesting to see what happens when you take those routes, just that in my mind it creates a better balance if the Leave ending is true. The In Water ending would have you siding with Angela, unable to go on. The Rebirth ending is giving in to the madness of the town. Rather than accepting Mary's death, James decides to do horrible things to overcome it. Kind of like Eddie decided he would just murder his way out of his grief had he lived. The Rebirth refers to Mary, but also as James, as to someone who has been rebirthed and has accepted the town's inherent evil. In the Leave ending, James honors Mary by finding the courage to go on, and one can assume he will do as she wished and adopt Laura. Interestingly, this ending is internally named the Recovery ending in the PC version, although the game calls it Leave to the player. You see, I consider Silent Hills and Silent Hill as taking a Saw-like approach to helping people. It puts them through horrible, terrible ordeals to test their will to survive, as well as force them to accept horrible truths. As awful as Pyramid Head is, do you notice that Maria represents a lie, and that Pyramid Head is always killing her? He's not just there to punish James, he's there to make him see the truth, even if it kills him. And Pyramid Head is happy to do that if you get close enough to him. Hey guys, it's post-production Trend here. I just wanted to say I completely forgot to talk about the Maria ending in the review, so I wrote a few notes on it and I'm doing it now. Basically, this ending shows James killing Mary as the final boss instead of Monster Maria. It's the same boss, it's Mary before it turns into the monster. And James basically decides to leave Silent Hill with Maria instead of just with Laura or killing himself or doing whatever. This is kind of a bizarre ending thematically, and I think basically it represents a James who learned nothing from the whole ordeal and is just continuing on in his way. Because Maria represents a lie, right? She's basically this strange, idealized, fictional version of Mary he dreamt up in his head and the town put together somehow. So I think if he leaves the town with Maria, James has learned nothing. And Maria, in fact, coughs to signify that she's going to have the same illness as Mary. I know that's a point that's been repeated thousands of times on every ending. But it happens. James leaves with her anyway. He's kind of forward with her about that cough. So he's really learned nothing. He hasn't grown as a person. And I think it will be interesting to see what happens if he tries to take her outside Silent Hill. Like, will she cease to exist? Will he be the only one that can see her because she avoids normal people during the game? I don't know. It's an interesting ending. It's kind of weird and out there. But ultimately, I think it represents James having learned nothing. Anyway, back to the rest of the review. Once James himself kills Monster Maria, he's treated to a one-off reunion with Mary. Whether it's a dream or something supernatural isn't clear, but he's granted the chance to make peace and have closure. For James to drive off in water after this or go try to resurrect her just doesn't sit well with me. I know you could argue that's the point, and oftentimes mental illness doesn't have a happy ending, and you'd be right, unfortunately. But I like a good ending where everyone learns something. Just let me have this one, okay? I realize that's more of a summary of my thoughts than a true synopsis, but for a game that's been so heavily covered and talked about, I thought it more prudent to give you my thoughts on the story and what it means, rather than just cover something you've all seen before. Silent Hill 2 sets itself apart with excellent sound design. Akira Yamaoka knew when to use absolutely beautiful tracks that you would listen to in your car, and when to use ambient tracks that are for setting a mood. He also knew to use oppressively horrible tracks that sound like some sort of industrial experimental noise band to increase the terror and fear in an area. Enemy sound design is mainly just moaning and groaning, but the music is so abrasive in places you can't tell if the slamming sound is yet an unseen enemy coming towards you from the dark or just part of the music. The game will also use sound cues from other rooms from time to time to give you a hint of where to go next. It's not the first time this has been done in a game, but it's certainly a nice touch that breaks the monotony of just searching 1,000 different doors. The sound is a lot of what sets this game apart from Resident Evil. When I play through Remake again, it's not scary anymore because I know where everything is, where the jump scares are, and when the spoopy music will play. Silent Hill 2 isn't without problems like any good game. Fortunately, they aren't big hang-ups, but mostly tiny gripes. Silent Hill 2 has a winded mechanic for James when he runs long periods of time, which seems like they were trying to make some sort of tension when being chased by monsters, but they weren't willing to go all in with it. Instead of stopping or stumbling or something, James just runs a little slower until you stop and let him catch his breath. He never gets slow enough that monsters can catch him, and you can reset the stamina by looking at the menu or opening the map, so what's the point?
Why are you running? Why are you running?
I call this a minor gripe because there are a few sections where you have to explore the streets of Silent Hill proper, and you can't run at full speed throughout these. The enemies never get close, so making the player slow here feels unnecessary. Silent Hill's riddles also do their job, but they could use a little bit more interactivity. Most of them just involve finding a key or finding a note that unlocks a padlock or something. There's a puzzle later in the game where you rotate a block to chart a path through a room, and it's honestly one of the most interactive puzzles in the game. They could have taken a page from Resident Evil here and done slightly more interactive puzzles, things like the water sample puzzle in Resident Evil 3 or the brake puzzle in 0, but Silent Hill 2 rarely ventures further than getting a key, finding a combination, or finding two items to mix into something that resembles a key. Bosses are also somewhat lacking. Every one of them has the same strategy. Run away, shoot it, and then run further away. They try to up the tension with these by sticking them in close quarters, but even if you take a hit or two, the game gives you a ton of health items, so it's not really as tense as it should be. Hopefully the upcoming remake will be able to remedy this with its over-the-shoulder perspective. For tank control style survival horror games, there isn't just a whole lot as far as experimentation when it comes to boss fights. In the zero punctuation review of this game, Yahtzee made the point that what you're really doing in this game is finding a set of keys and fighting monsters. And yet, even with that being the case, the narrative of Silent Hill 2 makes it all worth it. I'm not knocking on Resident Evil here at all, quite the contrary. I think both games do very different things for survival horror, and I think they do their thing the best. Resident Evil is about a fight or flight response. It's about surviving a bad situation. Silent Hill is a psychological horror. Physical death is still certainly 100% possible, but in Silent Hill, or Silent Hill 2 anyway, the scariest thing is what's in your own head.
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Okay, but don't forget there are many doors, so you're all over the world.